Hello, welcome. I'm just giving it a few minutes to let people who might still be joining us come in, but this is the session for Creative UK, the academic panel session. So we're just going to give it a few minutes, but this is an open session and we invite you, the audience, to pop your questions in the Q&A and we're going to be putting them to our expert panel of academics here. So please don't be shy, pop those questions in the Q&A box and you'll get the chance to put those questions to our academics. I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes and then I'll introduce you to everybody here. Right, okay. So my name is Georgie Redbarns. I work in international student recruitment at Norwich University of the Arts, and I'm joined here today by three academics from Arts University Bournemouth. We have Xavier Pick. Welcome, Xavier.
Hi, everyone.
So Xavier is actually joining us today from Hong Kong. So yeah, very warm weather there, very cold weather here in the UK. So Xavier would describe himself as an illustrator, artist and filmmaker. Prior to working at AUB, he worked at SCAD in Hong Kong. I'm also joined by Richard Milligan. Welcome, Richard.
Hey, thank you.
Richard works at Falmouth and he is a lecturer for BA Games Development and BA Animation. He's an animator, 3D artist. He has 10 years of experience in industry. And we are also joined by our very own academic, Desmond Brett. Welcome, Desmond.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Hello.
Desmond is a lecturer for the MA and BA Fine Art programme at NUA. Desmond's primarily a sculptor and working principally with clay and wax and plaster. He's previously worked at Hull School of Art and York St John University. Welcome all. I'm just going to stop sharing my slides and then we can open up. So I'm going to start with some questions that we've got pre-prepared, but if we have anyone in the audience who wants to pop their questions in the Q&A box, just do so as we go along. Perhaps our discussions are going to prompt some more questioning. So Xavier, I'm going to start off with you. I'd like to ask you what you think is special about creative arts teaching at British universities.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, I did work for several years at an American art school, so I know the difference very much. I trained at Glasgow in the Royal College of Art, and then I've taught at various colleges, Manchester, Met, around the UK and here in Hong Kong. So I know that there is a big difference kind of, first of all, intellectually. I think that the rigor of developing concept, ideas, individuality, theory, the contextual studies aspect is a lot stronger in the UK. Very happy to say that. In the United States, it's a lot more to do with the surface visual. Does it look pretty? Does it look nice? Which is also, it's a lot more to do with the aesthetic rather than the meaning. So yeah, it's training you to be, to understand the place of your work within, you know, the whole, rather than just making it look beautiful, though we do that very well as well.
Would you agree with that, Desmond?
Yes, some good points. I would say that, I mean, firstly, it's such an amazing time to be an artist at the moment. I think it's perhaps more important than ever to be thinking creatively. The British Art School has changed so much in the last sort of 40, 50 years that I feel we're at a really interesting intersection of practices where, for example, here at NUA, we really privilege thinking through making and material-led practice. But that's also with the developments in AI and VL and all new technologies. There's a really fascinating coming together of the sort of two realms, and I would say that British institutions privilege making, privilege material led practice, but also there's a strong awareness of its history, of the history of what we're dealing with, but also looking ahead as well to the new, to the next. So it feels like a really, I think, maybe it's a British condition, but it feels that it feels like we're kind of in the eye of the storm, actually, in a really good way.
Yeah, exciting to be at the eye of the storm.
Yeah.
I'm going to come to you next, Richard. I wanted to ask you about teaching delivery. So that transition between high school and when you get to university, what are the key differences that you find that your students feel when they get to university, and how can counsellors at schools and students prepare themselves for that transition?
It's an interesting. I think the thing that strikes students kind of hard in their first year is that there is a lot more freedom, and that's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, you have more freedom for personal expression, but you're also invited to study by yourself some more as well. And I think that's one of the things that students struggle to grasp in their first year a little bit. So, and it's really, you should see that as an opportunity. If you're passionate about a subject, you have more space in which to kind of experiment and try things out. And you have staff who generally have come from industry. So, or you're more likely to have staff who've come from industry. So by experimenting and having the freedom to explore your ideas and then going back to your staff, you actually get a much higher insight than you would have if it was more prescribed. But I definitely think the freedom's the main area that people kind of are struck by when they come to university, because they're no longer being handheld through every single step, and there's no one particular right or wrong. You're given a brief and you can interpret it whichever way you want. And really the thing to do is see that as an opportunity for growth and experimentation.
Definitely, yeah. I've definitely had some international students say that to me, in that first year, when that's just kind of learning to organize your time yourself and be responsible for yourself. Xavier, would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking sort of personally what the big change was from high school, from A levels going to art school. I think it's to do with other people actually rather than yourself. When you're at school, you might be standing out. There might be one or two of you in the same kind of mindset of wanting to go to art school, and that's one or two out of maybe 100, 200 people in a year. And then you're suddenly thrown into this environment where you're surrounded by people just like you. Some are better than you. There's a healthy competition, and I'm still very good friends with my art teacher from 10 years where I was at the same school, but it was really one teacher, one or two teachers. Suddenly you've got 30, 40 incredible educators from different disciplines opening your eyes to all the possibilities of a creative career, and it changes you. And the other thing as well is just you get broken down in a very healthy way, where you suddenly are introduced to the fundamentals of art and design, the very, very basics, where you'll be working towards, an A-level or IB program or whatever, and it's project led, but then you'll get those fundamentals, you'll get that skill set, you'll have that questioning about who you are, what's the value of what you're doing, which can change your decision making about where you go. But I think foundation courses are absolutely fundamental, wonderful. It's often with international students, they think they can go straight to BA, but I thought that actually arrogantly, I would say arrogantly, thinking you could just go straight in and save a year. But that foundation course is an invaluable period. I learned more in that 1 year than over 3 years of degree. It's a different kind of level of research when you're going through a BA. You know, you're getting deeper into the project of what, you know, who you are and what you're doing, but that foundation surrounded by loads of people from different disciplines is life-changing. And the British environment, the art school environment is, as my distinguished colleague Desmond just mentioned, you know, it's an eye of the storm, it's vibrant, it's energetic, it's really exciting. But thank you, that's a great question.
Thank you for sharing your kind of personal experience on that as well, Xavier. Leading on from that bit, actually, we've had a question in the Q&A, which I'm going to put to you, Desmond. They're asking, can you talk a bit about managing that fear of failure when your creative work is being assessed for grades, and how do you balance taking creative risks with ensuring academic success? I feel like that leads on well from that transition from high school into university, where you're really being challenged.
That's such a terrific question, and such a relevant question, because I think we're probably, my colleagues will agree that we often meet students who are terrified of failure, and yet we're encouraging failure, and it's easier said than done. I suppose, in short, we invite, from my perspective as a fine art tutor, I invite students to take risks, because it's a way of understanding oneself, one's work, and how it's progressing. Because it's impossible to know, it's impossible to gain any authority about one's practice without making it sort of contriving a failure. And I mean, in a failure, making art isn't easy, and studying art isn't easy. But if all one ever does is the same thing within a certain kind of zone of comfort and ease, then arguably one won't progress with one's practice. So I would absolutely say that a student who's willing to take risks and experiment will be endorsed and rewarded, if you like, with in terms of academic success. And I'm very conscious. I don't always like to talk about learning outcomes and grades, and I'd rather talk about the work with students, because I feel like if a student's really bubbling along and zinging along with some ideas and developing their practice and energetic and trialing out all sorts of different ways of working, that the grades will follow. But I also appreciate that it is an important factor when applying for a university. But an art school is a very particular site, and an arts university is a very particular site where we invite students to try to push things to the point of failure, because only then will you know where the work can go. So, for example, working in a non-linear way, instead of idea equals output, and maybe taking some wrong turns, flipping ideas on their heads, stepping outside of your normal way of working. There are strategies you can use with it on a course, on a degree course, that will enable you to try things out and to come from to develop a position of authority. So I hope in a sort of long-winded way, I hope I've answered that, because quite frankly, if a student comes to me with a load of work that's in some ways a car crash, but at the same time there'll be some interesting things coming out of it, for me that's brilliant. That's really exciting. I don't really want a student to just carry on doing the same old thing over 3 years. I want them to take risks, and we support that. Brilliant.
Thank you, Desmond. Yeah, that was a very good quote that Xavier's put in the chat. There's no success like failure, and failure is no success at all. Bob Dylan. Thank you for that.
I think that's brilliant. I mean, it says it all, doesn't it? I know everything to my failures, and I fail, and you fail harder and you try harder. That's what you do. It's part of the creative journey, and you embrace it. Embrace uncertainty, 100%.
If I could sort of just come back, Xavier, that's a brilliant point. I think it's also understanding what we mean by failure, what failure actually is, because a failure isn't necessarily drawing the nose wrong, or it might be that it's pushing something to an extreme, but in a deliberate way. Sometimes it's pushing a sculpture onto the floor and seeing how it breaks open, for example.
Well, that sounds exciting. Making a mess is a good thing. I think I'd just like to make sure that I can move on and let Richard answer a question. Thank you very much. That was very comprehensive. I wanted to come to you, Richard, and ask you about some of the projects that your students do on animation and games. And could you tell us a bit more about any ones that you're particularly excited about that you want to share with us?
This is a tricky one. I'm very possessive over my babies. I mean, essentially, because we're just a huge studio, our whole practice is based around having a big studio with multidisciplinary teams making games. We make a lot of games, and after 3 years of making games in teams, there are some really good ones. So it's very difficult to pick a particular one. But I think the best thing to talk about would probably be a competition called Transfuser, which is a UK Gov funded competition. And we always put our student games forward. Well, we select 1 or 2 and we submit a bid. And for the last 3 years running, our student teams have won the £25,000 prize and continued making their game. And some of them, they're just amazing. We've currently got one now that won, and we're now incubating them. And it's about dinosaurs. There aren't many games about dinosaurs, and it's really, really cute. You basically traverse the land with your dinosaur and interact with it and learn about the environment from the way that your dinosaur responds. And it's really quite beautiful. I could link the previous year's winner, their YouTube promo. If you give me 1 second, I can put that in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great.
So this one was a response to us not looking after our planet. And you are basically with the forest fighting against the robots. But it's quite a stunningly presented piece. And this was a game that they started making when they were studying with us, and then they finished, and we told them that we'd like to put them through for Transfuser. So they came back and we housed them over the summer and kind of helped them to guided them through making the game. And I think they have in total, I think it's 6 months in total. And making games takes a long time, so it's pretty impressive.
That is, yeah, that sounds an amazing game. Sounds like one I want to have a go at.
Yeah, 4 or 5 people, I think, in total making the game.
That's very exciting. Kind of leading on from that, Richard, can I ask you a bit more about some of the different kinds of careers that your graduates from animation and games have gone on into? I mean, I know a lot of people, when they think about games, they think, oh, I want to do games because I love playing games and just want to be testing games all the time. But it's such a huge industry, and so many different kinds of jobs you can actually occupy. So can you kind of give us some examples? I know you'll have absolutely tons to choose from.
Got a massive list here.
Pick out a few examples.
Very proud of our students. But the range is kind of interesting, and I don't think people realize how many separate specialisms there are within games. We have a junior writer at a studio called Dambuster, environment artists who literally just make trees and rocks in games. We've got a bunch of animators, obviously, because they're mine, working Fire Sprite games. We've got people in Supermassive, Rockstar. We have an animator in Ubisoft. And we've got production assistants, so people helping with the production management. We've got quite a few writers in there, game designers, VFX artists, concept artists, cinematic artists. So there really are like a huge array of different careers that can come from studying games. And I guess that's why it's so integral to us personally that you pick a specialism when you come to study games, because there's so many different diverse individual careers to go into. So I hope I gave a good idea of some of them.
Yeah, it's difficult in a short amount of time to give a view of all the different kinds of jobs that you can do. There's actually quite an interesting question here. Someone's asked, do international graduates get jobs in the UK, and are we at a disadvantage over local students? Just before I put that to any of you, there is the new graduate route visa that launched last year, which now means that any international students graduating from university can remain in the UK for 2 years to work for themselves, look for work, and that is not tied to a particular employer. So that is a huge, huge advantage now over students in the past. And that's something that UK universities are very conscious that we want to make the most of to help our international graduates go into careers once they leave university. Does anyone want to come in on their view on whether you think international graduates might be at a disadvantage over local graduates, other than outside of the visa issue? Richard, yeah.
I'll do a quick one. Like, games are hugely multinational, and we are basically the best placed people to deal with COVID. Like, we were back up teaching the very next day because of the systems we use. Like, this kind of stuff is very, very regular for us. And at any given moment, you have game studios that have different studios in different countries, like all around the world. So for me, I don't see that there really could be an issue, because we're already used to working with different nationalities and studios in different parts of the world.
I'd agree with that. You know, the globe. You know, we're now working globally. We're not. Those students are working on a pinprick on the map. We're now able to have discourses and engage with people from all over the world very easily. But on a very practical level, an example, I've got a recent BA graduate who's now from Vietnam, who now works for an artist as one of his studio assistants, and she has gainful employment and is really doing brilliantly. So it's so much about ability and willingness to work, and whether it local or international. The most important thing is what kind of skills can you offer, and I don't see any disadvantage between international or UK based students at all.
I mean, it shows real strength of character to be able to go to the other side of the world and successfully think in a different way, and do your degree in a different language is something. I mean, if I was employing somebody, then I would think that is somebody who can really adapt, which is a transferable skill. Which brings me on to a question we've had from Philip. This is really in reference to when students are applying. He's talking about in the personal statement and the reference. I'm going to put this to you, Xavier. He's asking, what are some transferable skills beyond creativity that you might look for when you're looking at perhaps a personal statement for an applicant? Quite interesting question, that one. I think you're on mute at the moment, Xavier.
In terms of personal statements,
and reference as well, if there's anything, for a school counsellor when they're kind of writing a reference.
All the best creatives are doing things outside their school. I mean, they're doing the extracurricular. So it's those things that show passion and curiosity and social conscience, a creative conscience. We really do feel. I'm sure everyone will agree that the world needs healing, and art school, the creative education, is the only place that really is going to do it. The lawyers aren't going to do it, the bankers aren't going to do it. It's people with a vision for the future. If we can see, that aspect, it could just be as simple as doing some volunteer work, doing something just for the community, outside, the classroom. Exam results are one thing. It's that other magical thing where they're putting themselves out into situations that are challenging and kind and helpful to everyone else. That makes sense. Passion and curiosity is number one, I would say.
Yeah, I can see both Richard and Desmond frantically nodding your heads there. Is there anything you want to add to that? I think it's very comprehensive. No,
Well, if you don't mind me sort of offering, I mean, I'm always hooked in when particularly with a portfolio application, if a statement refers to other things that feed their creativity or their personality. So if a student's obsessed with collecting pebbles on the beach or hang gliding or collecting old photographs, anything, even it doesn't have to be to do with creativity. It might be that they love running. Those are the things they interest me, because that's part of someone's makeup, and it also shows to me that they're aware of they have other facets to their capabilities, and also if they're worldly wise, if they're aware of the world around them, that isn't necessarily about art or creativity. It might be about politics or other issues outside. These things really make a difference to a statement.
Indeed, yeah.
I would have to agree. Like, I feel if art is to be an expression of yourself, then you need more of yourself to express, right? So do more things. So when people have interests and hobbies and things they're really passionate about, it just interests me as a human. I'm an educator, but I'm a human. And when I'm looking at statements, I'm looking at the human in front of me, not just a potential student. So I love it when someone has a hobby that's something I've never heard of.
I love it.
What is that? Because then I find more about that person and I can kind of understand a little bit where they're coming from. And yeah, I think some people try to be the default example of what you need to be to get into this university. Whereas I don't think that helps. I think just be you, just the things that you're interested in, just let us know, and kind of express as much of you as you can. Bearing in mind, you know, don't go outside of the box.
Literally go in the box when you're well, kind of leading on from that, actually, Richard, there's a question that relates to portfolios, and they're asking about, is it good to show a range of methods in your portfolio application for university? Does that help it stand out? I mean, obviously from your perspective for a games and animation portfolio, what are the key things that you're looking for? Is there a typical kind of portfolio, or is it really open?
I'm so informal. I'm the worst person to ask on this. Anything fancy. Like, I mostly just look for people who are passionate about things, but I think showing a particular skill in a particular area is great, but definitely if you have some more range in there, I think it definitely helps, because if nothing else, it shows us that you're interested in other avenues, that you're willing to explore. So definitely try to have some kind of range in there. But if you have a particular area that you excel in, then obviously you give that a little bit more airtime. But I would definitely say to have some kind of range in there, and then just have a bigger body that's more or your specialist kind of area.
If you're looking for students for games and animation, do you expect them to have digital artwork in their portfolio application usually, or do you expect them to have some animated, anything animated, or any games that they've already made? Do they have to have that?
It's a tricky one for me. Animation's not something that many people come across lightly. Like in school, you talk to write, and you draw, you even talk to program now. Animation is something that you really have to pursue and go out of your way to kind of have any experience with. So most of my students come in with very limited animation, not all, but very limited animation on there, and they will have a range of other things. And I tell them beforehand, just show me a range of different things, your artistic interests, because all I'm really looking for is that spark, that inspiration, that passion. So it's awkward for me from an animation perspective, because it's just not something that's very out there, and people don't really think of it that much as a career that they can go into. So I don't specifically request a high level animation portfolio. I'm more looking at the eye that kind of goes behind the artwork, whether they're drawing or whether they've made something in 3D or they've made a game, I'm more looking at just how they look at things and trying to understand kind of why it is that they're choosing animation and where their passion lies.
Mhm.
I think with some of the other game areas that we offer, it is a bit more likely that you will have made a game. Like in programming, there are some really accessible like areas or platforms you can use to make simple games. But for me personally, I'll accept any kind of artistic expression, and then I'll just quiz you about it. I'm not mean in interviews, but I'll quiz you about it because I just get interested.
Thank you, Richard. Desmond, do you have, from like a fine art point of view, do you have a kind of top tip for your portfolio?
Yes, yeah, a couple of top tips. Yeah, I would absolutely recommend any application for fine art doesn't just include the hits. I don't want the hits. I want some of the hits, but because the temptation is just to show the best stuff. And actually, I want to see the guts. I want to see the working out. So my top tip is to include rough drawings, sketches, design possibilities, all the working out that led you to that piece of work, that demonstrates your willingness to think broadly and creatively around a problem. So that's a really important part of it, because I have seen portfolios, I look at portfolios that are lots of really wonderful, slick, finished work, but it only tells me part of the story. I want to know how you got there, how the idea evolved, and how did you solve those problems, those issues. So yeah, I really want to see. I want to see a lot of working out. However rough and ready that might be, because that helps see a greater dimension to someone's practice as well. So that's my main tip.
Thank you, Desmond. Xavier, I imagine you've seen a lot of portfolios in your time. So do you want to add anything?
I can agree more with both my colleagues. We want to see potentiality. We don't want to see the end result. You know, if they're all there and it looks like they are the perfect illustrator, photographer, filmmaker, whatever, that's not really that interesting. And especially if you go on to postgraduate as well, you know, we don't want to see that industry ready person. We want to see what their potential is, and it's the working out, it's process, it's ideas that could go in some different directions. And you know, as Richard was saying, yeah, you know, you've got to show a little bit of that skill, but slick finished stuff, copied work, it's very easy to copy, and that's how we started. That's how everyone starts off. You copy a photograph to draw from. We want to see sketchbooks. I mean, that's, you know, the ideas in a sketchbook, okay, full of passion and integrity.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, I know that's a question we get asked a lot when you're visiting schools, and there's always that feeling of like, oh, I can't put that in because it's not finished, it's not the final piece. But you have to get over that and say, no, we want to see your thinking, we want to see how your mind works. That's the most interesting part.
And the portfolio as a whole, it should be designed well. I mean, you can have rough ideas, mind maps, little notes and ideas, but you could design that well. If we look at any great artist, writer, whatever, you know, the notebook, the working out of things can be displayed in a creative way. So it's having, you know, that you're telling a story. There's a sequence in how you would see a portfolio. Usually, you know, it usually starts A, B, C, D, E, you know, all the way through. I know in the American system, they would sometimes, because they're seeing so many students at, say, Parsons or somewhere, got a friend who's working there, and they would put the whole portfolio on one slide. So you'd get an overview of the whole you know, student in one go. One slide, there's your 10, 15 slides in one slide, because they're flicking through them very, very fast. We would spend a little bit more time in the UK. We would go through that. So you've got that story, you know, that narrative going through. You know, how do you want the viewer, the audience, us, you know, course leaders to see that story? So you can design it a little bit that way, you know, in that way in mind. But it's not the finished stuff. We'll flick through. We'll probably spend more time on some quick 1-minute studies from life drawing sessions than we would at that, that 50-hour still life setup, from school. We'd spend more time on that, a few minutes of work that you've done, over time. Anyway, that makes sense.
That's very interesting to hear, direct from the academics. You've heard it here. We had another question, which I'm going to ask you, Richard, which is, how diverse is the creative community in the UK? Is it receptive to different life and cultural experiences?
I think especially now it's hugely celebratory of all walks of life. I don't think you'd find an issue coming from a particular background or direction and trying to have your artistic expression listened to. I think we're massively craving as many cultural influences as we possibly can. So in a short form answer, like bring it all on, I think is kind of our appetite.
Brilliant. Desmond, do you want to? Oh, Xavier, come on
no,
in.
we just embrace cultures. We just love art school's an amazing place where you sat next to someone from Japan, or just interviewed a student from Tibet. Like, wow, who's from 3rd generation of Tanka Buddhist painters, and she's wanting to do illustration, and just being next to these people from different cultures in the art school environment, and then into industry. Beyond, we embrace different foods, music, all these things that, it's this melting pot, that we encourage greatly. It's the most free thinking and kind environment that I know. I love art school. I do. I love it. My parents didn't want me to go to art school. My parents didn't. There's a great question actually, about your parents. That's a big one. But anyway, I'll shut up.
No, well, Xavier, it looks like you're desperate to answer this one. It's a very good question. I think all of you should have a chance to talk about this. But Xavier, great question here, saying, my parents don't think being an artist is a good career. How do I convince them? What a great question. Xavier, come on in there.
I'm here in Hong Kong in Asia. I've worked here for years, and I'm a lot older. How it was in York, I'm from York, and how it was in Yorkshire when I was growing up is very similar to how it is here in Hong Kong and other Asian countries. The parents have this idea in their head. They haven't understood how creativity is a massive industry. The ideas economy is growing immensely. There's a great book by Noel Yuval Harari, Sapiens, and the other books about where we're all going as a society. It's technology, it's artificial intelligence, it's creative thinking. It's 1 in 10 employees in the UK will be in the creative industry. But parents have this preconception, sort of very old school, of like those standard degrees which are comfortable and nice. The lawyer, the doctor, the engineer, etc. But they don't realize that actually the world is changing so fast. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 years, 10 years. What's happened in the last 20 years, we could never have imagined. And the future is in technology and creative thinking and those transferable skills that we'll get in our school. You might be doing sculpture, but what you're learning in the sculpture room is actually so applicable to other things as well. It might be to do with engineering and people and collaboration and all these other skills that industry is looking for creatively.
Absolutely. Desmond, have you got anything to add to that? Could you give us some examples perhaps of the kind of careers that artists that have actually done? Because it's not always necessarily, it's not a straight path, is it? But
no, it isn't. No, I mean, it's there's no one way to be an artist. I would say that first and foremost. There's no one way to do this. And you have to balance one's practice with other elements, like other careers that support your practice. And I would often say to students, if you have another job, if you've got a day job that pays for time in the studio, then that's worth its while. But first and foremost, being an artist is the first career move. Often questions are about what career will I have? Well, you'll be an artist first and foremost, and how you become an artist is, as I said, is a number of different sort of forms of being an artist. But I mean, I've got examples of students. I'll give you one example of a recent painter whose paintings were, every year we show in the free range show in London, the Truman Brewery, and somebody bought her work, her entire show, and was very interested in her work, and then ended up employing her to buy art for their collection as well. I can't name the celebrity singer, let's just say, but he or they have a good line in glasses and hats in the 1970s. Anyway, that's one thing. But we've got students who've set up an entire studio complex and a gallery in Norwich at Outpost. Outpost Gallery was set up by NUA students, and it's one of the most important non-for-profit galleries in the country. It's an international gallery. So that's one thing. So you might work with other creative people to develop a community-orientated practice. We have another recent graduate who works with hospitals in the east of England, developing visual stimulus for patients recovering from major surgery. So that's a very significant job opportunity for a painter. And as I alluded to earlier, I've got one student from Vietnam. I have 5 graduates who are currently working for one artist to develop a major body of sculptural work as well. So there are lots of opportunities for students to take that will enhance and enable their practice to continue. And I could list any number of students who are working with galleries as technicians or studio assistants or curators as well.
Thanks, Desmond. What are the kind of new jobs that you're seeing emerge in your field, Richard? I mean, obviously, games is a huge industry and vastly expanding. But a lot of those roles, I mean, didn't exist 5 years ago. What are you thinking? Thinking 5 years, 10 years ahead? How do you think that's going to evolve further? And how can somebody who kind of goes into creative degree now, what kind of roles do you think they might be doing in the future?
First off, ouch, that's a
big question.
I mean, for me, the areas that seem to be just growing and growing are things relating to AI. And that doesn't mean that it writes humans out of the equation. I could go into that a little bit. And in visualization, so game engines are essentially a thing. I'm just going to hold it up to the screen. They're a thing that you plug everything else into. You plug so many disciplines into it, and you give it logic, and then eventually you tell it how a controller will make all of this stuff work. And this will trigger the sound of footsteps, which will trigger particles of light and play an animation. And you have all of these things kind of plugged into the game engine, and that's how you play your games. However, game engines are used in films massively. I don't know if anyone watched The Mandalorian, but those massive, amazing, immersive sets weren't massive, amazing, immersive sets that were created in a game engine. And they're using, I think it's called Stagecast, new technology where they have a green screen that the actors perform in, and they're essentially beaming on an example of the environment so that the actors can play with that and not actually ever have to be in the particular Grand Canyon environment they're meant to be. This is all created in a game engine, and all of the camera moves are conducted inside of a game engine, but the actors can kind of get a sense of being there. So I think the use of game engines as a visualization tool is definitely growing. We've seen it in lots of different fields, and they're being used in engineering as well. So I think that's a massive area. And AI, obviously, we all know that AI is basically in everything we own. Some of the dumbest seeming devices that we have got AI in them, just very small bits of AI. And we're now starting to use AI in increasingly creative and artistic ways, like helping using AI to help our artistic process, and using AI to look at a million photographs and then be able to understand how to fix various photographs. Like it's bonkers. So I think those two areas, two of the big areas of growth. But as someone who's actually thinking I want to go into the games industry, you go in and as an animator, your craft has not changed since Disney came up with those 12 principles. Like we literally look at the 12 principles all the time, even when we're working with motion capture, when people put the suits with bobbles on them. It always takes a skilled animator afterwards to go in, tidy it all up, accentuate some of the motions and give it real life. So as much as AI is kind of infiltrating everything, it always needs that human practitioner at the end, because there just isn't a substitute for your experience and your eyes and your understanding of what it is to be a human being.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Very well answered. Xavier, would you add anything on your view of why creativity is so important in this kind of new digital age that we're living in?
Yeah, just following on from Richard, I've just sent an image of that author I told you about.
Oh yes, the Sapiens, but
yeah, and the other two as well, because it
fantastic.
Really is the long big history and the future history of us. Creativity. Okay, AI does one thing: it can make things useful. It saves us time. New technology it's changed our lives. It goes without saying. But just a piece of paper and a pen, or some words. AI can't do that. They've kind of worked out, that some artificial intelligence programs could write a poem or a song. Is it going to be the Beatles again? No, it isn't. It's the human condition. It's our story that we're going through in life. We're responding to our environment. We have emotional connection with everyone around us and our spaces, and we're responding to that. So when it comes down to that sort of thinking, you can't learn. It's through experience and it's through being human. And so the art school education will get you to not rely on the technology. We can see I mean, I just judged a film competition for the British Council in China for AUB this week, and there was a number of entries that were just plugging film footage through AI apps, and it looked amazing. It looked great, but there was just no content, no concepts, no story, no feeling. Story is everything in what we do. It might be an abstract story, but it is it's not necessarily narrative, but that is something that we learn. And it's not just the practical things, it's those other things we get at art school, the great historical context, art historians, design historians, that will inform our practice as well, to understand where our work fits within the historical context.
Thank you. Desmond, I have a question for you, kind of leading on from that. What do you consider the core qualities of a student studying creative arts degrees?
That's a goodie. That's a good question. Resilience. So resilience to challenge ideas, not just to be challenged, but to challenge the ideas that are being formed or being proposed by tutors or peers. And resilience to push through ideas or creative work that might not be working out. These are back to the failures again. Resilience to push through that. Flexibility to explore different approaches to making work. There's manifold ways to create a landscape. There's millions of ways to design a sculpture of a figure. Open-mindedness to new ideas, to being challenging new ones, develop new ideas, new thinking, willingness to devote time to an evolving practice. That's something that I feel is so important. I think we are very, with so much information and so much material around to stimulate us. I would call on students to, an art student, or a quality of being a successful student is to spend time, to have time, to devote time. Diligence to trialing, testing, as I said, experimenting and developing, and being open-minded and experimental to new ideas, to new thinking.
Thank you,
I might have repeated the last one, but there we are. That's my drop-down list, I think.
Absolutely brilliant. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for you now, Richard. Actually, I'm going to ask all of you this. What's a common misconception about your subject area? I'm going to start with you, Richard. And what's really the case? This is your chance to put the case straight.
I mean, there's quite a few misconceptions because we deal with games. Apparently, we're all just those old school stereotypical ideas of what a gamer is, which we're not, because most of the world games, they just don't know it because they're doing it on their phone. But the biggest one I think that I see is that you need to know programming. Like, why does an animator need to know programming? Why does an artist need to know programming? You're going into a team where there are programmers who are infinitely more skilled than you. You don't need to know programming because they'll do it. They're paid to do it. And I think that's the biggest misconception. That's not to say that we don't appreciate T-shaped people who have their main body of skills and then a little spread of different things that they know some of. We very much value that, and it really helps your practice to understand other practices and what other people are doing, particularly in a team. But no, you don't need to program in order to make games at all.
That's brilliant.
Unless you're a programmer.
Of course, of course.
I need to add that.
In which case, it's kind of essential.
Yeah, you should do that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Brilliantly succinct there. Thank you. Xavier, this is your chance. A common misconception that you'd like to put straight?
Yeah, I mean, I studied illustration in the UK, and there's a preconception that it's just making picture books. It's doing it. It's not that at all. I mean, there was people that I studied with. It is in America. I would say that it's very much. It's like a dictionary definition of what illustration is, but it's communicating visual ideas, and you know, how broad is that? It's definitely communication. And that can be in many different forms. I mean, just thinking about colleagues that went on maybe just to look at color, you know, just color. It was purely color. That's all they studied. It was verging over into fine art. It also was to do with the theory of color, which is fundamentally to do with design. And there was one student that was just interested in dance, and that was illustration, documented, you know, how we explore dance or body and movements. So, and it goes on. It could just be the shape and form of type, or it could be making a space that's a story that's illustrative. There's many. It's so broad. There's no particular career path for an illustrator. At all. Obviously, you know, there's some fantastic illustrators that follow the tradition in the Victorian sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Desmond?
Oh, it makes me cry inside when I think about some of the assumptions that have been made. Yeah, right. Okay. Right. Let's deal with a couple of these. Right. Firstly, fine art. One of the big misconceptions is that it's a hobby. It's a hobby. It's a wonderful hobby. It's not a hobby. Fine art can be, it can be, if you want it to be a hobby, then go and do some painting out of a tree with a group of people. That's fine. But fine art can be much more than that. And if it's not a hobby, fine art is, you could call it it could be a calling or an obsession or a need. And I have students who needs to be doing it. It's something they can't think of anything else other than their practice. Okay, next one, that it serves no useful function. I'd like to prick that bubble as well. I would say artists are, or making art and artists are, incredibly resilient, worldly, multifaceted people. And in reality, a fine art degree is a rigorous, rich, rewarding, creative opportunity to make the world a better place. There.
Brilliant. I could tell you were ready to get that off your chest. That was fantastic. Thank you very much, Desmond.
Spicy.
Very well put. Okay, so
I like it. It's a hobby.
Oh dear. I actually
I
have
had a great hobby day today.
it's that sort of slightly condescending comment from, they might say, what a nice, that must be such a nice thing to be doing in your spare time. That sort of comment.
Yeah. Had it all.
No room for that here. Right, brilliant. Okay, so we've got 3 minutes left. I've just got one more question to put to all of you. So we'll try and keep it fairly succinct, but if you had to just give one piece of advice for students when they're choosing their university, what one piece of advice would you give to somebody who's at that point now where they're trying to decide what is the right university for them to go to? Richard, I'm going to start with you first.
Sorry, is this when they're deciding what university to go to?
Yes, yeah. If they're just trying to decide on their particular course that they want to do, how do they make sure they're making the right decision about what they're studying and where they're going? I can come back to you.
No, it's okay. I think the most important thing to know is what you want from that university. So if you don't particularly see yourself going into a career, but are doing this because it's something that you just want to develop in and study, then find something that has a really good base for that. If you want to go into work in this particular area, then think about what the workplace needs from you. So like in my particular instance, the workplace would need you to be a specialist and work in teams. So find a university that will allow you to do those two things and then look into them. Any that don't fit the bill, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where your friends go. It doesn't matter any of those things. If you want to pursue this as a career, as something that you do for the rest of your life, find the things that actually are essential to that career and then just get rid of all of the universities that do not satisfy that. And there are many errors you can make in that area. So I think that's the most important thing to do. Match it to what it is you want to get from the experience.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Xavier?
Yeah, I mean, I think really good advice is don't necessarily go for the name. Don't go for a college that you think sounds good, because it might not be the case. I'm not saying which colleges they are, but the actual reality of being there is very different than the name. The branding is very powerful, especially now. Second thing is find out who is going to be teaching you. A college isn't the building or the name, it's the people who are there. And if you can find out who they are, find out truthfully from students what the experience is, you might have a better choice than just the place or building. It's quite hard when you're 10,000 kilometers away from the university, but it's very easy just to reach out, look at student work, okay? Look at degree shows, they're all online at the moment. So you have the summer shows, get a flavor of who the people are, what they're producing, find out who the course leaders are, find out who the other part-time tutors are, look at them and study them more than the building and the place.
Brilliant, thank you. And Desmond, very succinctly, because I realise we're now at time.
Be led by your heart, not your head. If it feels like the right place, then it will be.
Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. There were some incredibly comprehensive answers there, and I think this has been really valuable session. So thank you very much, Richard, Desmond, and Xavier for joining me. And thank you everybody who was able to join the live session, and we will be sharing a recording of this later on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
I've
everyone.
added you
Bye-bye.
on LinkedIn. I'd love to stay in touch with you two. You're amazing. Thank you.
Oh, cool. Bless. Yeah.
Let's talk more. It's brilliant.
Let's do that.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care all.